Ah, Smart Water, now in a sleek can.
This feels cool, literally.
Perfect for social gatherings and on the go.
Should I start wearing turtlenecks?
One sip at a time, friend. Smart Water cans, for those with a taste for taste. Get yours today.
This episode is brought to you by Temptations Cat Treats. Your cat will come running for the perfectly irresistible Temptations Creamy Puree and Temptations Lickable Spoon Cat Treats. The best time to feed lickable cat treats to your cat is anytime. Feed by hand for a playful moment, in a bowl for a creamy treat, or as a topper to make mealtime fun. Visit temptationstreats.com to learn more.
Hello and welcome to Vulgar History, a feminist women's history comedy podcast. My name is Anne Foster, and today we are having a conversation with Paula Akpan, who is the author of a new book that I have read and I super recommend, that is called When We Ruled: The Rise and Fall of 12 African Queens and Warriors. And the cover of this book is the image of an African leader who we've talked about on the show before. A couple years ago, I did a season called International, where I was talking about people from various countries around the world. And one of those people was Njinga of Matamba and Ndongo, who is one of the figures covered in this book. And I was so excited that Njinga was in this book. And Paula really has a great discussion in the Njinga chapter about Njinga's gender identity, which is complex and interesting. And the episodes that I did, I she, her pronouns for Njinga. That was my choice. Paula Akpan uses they, them pronouns, which I might argue is a better choice. And had I read this book before I did those episodes, I probably would have made that choice as well. But if you want to learn more about Njinga specifically, who is an incredibly interesting, audacious, and notable person from history, you can listen back to the Vulgar History two episodes. I think each episode is at least an hour long, talking about Njinga's story. I'll link to those in the show notes here, or if you're on Spotify, I'll say this is like there's a thing in Spotify now where you can say like related episodes. Anyway, so if you want to listen to that story, we do talk about Njinga, but Paula explains the whole saga in this interview. You don't need to listen to those first. And I was so excited to talk to Paula. Honestly, I had my whole schedule figured out for episodes for this month. And then I heard about this book and I was like, stop the presses. I need to do more episodes because I have to talk to Paula about this book. So who is she? Paula Akpan is a historian and journalist with a BA in sociology and an MA in Black British history. This is her first nonfiction book. It's so good. It's so interesting. We talk about all the reasons why in this chat. And it's Pride Month here in North America. So I was especially excited to talk to Paula about the queer African history that she gets into in this book as well. You'll note that the subtitle is The Rise and Fall of 12 African Queens and Warriors. That's because not everybody in this book is a queen. Not everybody in this book would use that term. So it's like queens and also genderqueer leaders. And anyway, Paula's so fun to talk to, and I hope you really enjoy this conversation with Paula Akpan about her new book, When We Ruled. So I'm joined today by Paula Akpan, author of When We Ruled: The Rise and Fall of 12 African Queens and Warriors. Welcome, Paula.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to talk to you about this book. I'm so excited that this book exists, first of all. Can you tell everybody kind of the scope of what this book comprises, like the time periods, like what kind of people you're talking about?
Absolutely. So the book covers around about the last 1,000 years, but we can start it around the 12th century. And it follows 12 women rulers, but also genderqueer rulers across the breadth of the African continent. And I specifically wanted to examine below the Sahara Desert as well, because so much of what we think about when it comes to African civilizations tends to be focused in Northern Africa and around Egypt. And I think it fuels this idea of an underdeveloped or barren Africa So I really wanted to explore from Ethiopia to Burundi, Angola, Madagascar, and all of these figures who are elites. They aren't representative of the conditions of African women during these periods from the 12th century through to the 21st century, but also the power that they wielded, whether fighting against European imperialist forces or leveraging that power against their own people to pretty detrimental means. So I'd say it's that.
Yeah. No, and I love that. And I mean, like you said, this women and also genderqueer people. So that's where the title is African Queens and Warriors. So it's expansive. It encompasses different kinds of leaders.
Exactly. I wanted to reflect the fact that Njinga, who is also on the front of the book, how they understood their gender with plurality. They didn't have gendered pronouns in their language of Kimbundu. So I wanted to at least acknowledge that somewhat.
And we're going to get into that. We're going to get into the
Yeah,
gender
all
stuff.
the gay stuff.
Oh my God. There's y'all, there's a lot of gay stuff in this book and it's really exciting. But first, I just want to so everybody understands the book a bit better. So how many of these people had you heard of before you began the process for writing this book? Like all of them or some of them? Or how did you choose which 12 would be the 12?
Yeah, so I knew of a few of them. So I'm half Nigerian, and a lot of West Africans will know of Nana Santwa, this elderly figure who took on the British at the dawn of the 20th century. And so there are these figures that some of us will know by virtue of what our heritage is. But many of them I hadn't encountered in depth. Like I knew about Njinga, I knew about Poku, but in no depth. Or they came to me as like pedagogical kind of tools. The likes of Poku and Moremi, who was a ruler in present day Nigeria. They are found in children's books and, these selfless figures who gave up, who made personal sacrifices for kin and kingdom. And I wanted to just dig a little bit deeper, examine a bit more, but crucially, as an African of the diaspora, I wanted it to be led by local storytellers, local historians, visits to heritage sites. So that kind of formed a bit of the selection process. I created, history nerd that I am, create like a massive matrix with as many rulers that I could find that were women or genderqueer across the continent, and then kind of narrowed it down on, are there heritage sites still standing? Are there storytellers that I can locate and historians that I can locate who would be willing to engage with me? And that kind of shaped, like, that was one of the parameters. Obviously, the Northern Africa thoughts as well shaped that. And just, I think also how much source material was kind of accessible to me, especially as someone who is an English speaker, which of course, again, shapes so much of the book, because you will have archival materials, for example, in Madagascar, but they are in French or Malagasy. So that was kind of a sticking point when I was trying to research Ranavalona, but then being able to locate English-speaking storytellers, which again skews the history that I'm kind of pulling together. So I think that is something that historians, especially engaging histories that are in indigenous tongues or other languages, how we're mediating all of this through language. I think language comes up a lot across the book, as it should. But those were a couple of the factors. And also, if I would be able to actually have any access. So, for example, Sudan and, South Sudan, those were places that I was just like, I'm not sure that I can actually safely access. And it's why I didn't end up traveling to Ethiopia, even though I knew that I wanted to study and write about Mintwab. So those are a few of the factors.
Well, and you mentioned this, and I think everybody should know that part of what was really interesting to me. I mean, everything was interesting to me about the book, but I'm like, oh, I've never read a book like this. Like, you're inserted in the narrative, talking about the places that you went and the people that you talked to. Can you describe sort of that, your decision to travel to these places and to insert yourself in the book?
Of course. So traveling was just from the start was a non-negotiable. It's part of my historical practice, but also that to not travel and attempt to write this book from London, going to, I don't know, SOAS University and sitting in those archives, it reeks of the kind of colonial anthropology work that would take place across the periods that I'm examining, where you'd have British explorers and expeditioners.
You're making
Sorry,
air
air quotes, air quotes, air quotes.
Just so people know.
Would write about lands that they had never actually stepped foot in and would perhaps visit after the fact. So there's one of the writers who is quite fundamental to what we know of Ranavalona, that ruler of the Imerina kingdom found in present-day Madagascar. He wrote an entire history of Madagascar without visiting the kingdom. And I don't want to repeat that. I don't want to suggest that African history work is a discipline that doesn't require the same rigor that we would expect if you're doing classical history work. You would surely go to visit all of the sites that are touted as classical history sites. So that was quite crucial for me. And in terms of inserting myself, I guess I really wanted from the start, I really wanted to ensure that not only was I exploring the legacies of these figures, but also the impact that their rules have had on these present day countries today and the descendants of, the people that they ruled over who live with these legacies. How do Madagascan people, Malagasy people, understand Ranavalona, who is remembered particularly by colonial historians as the Bloody Mary of Madagascar, and slaughtered so many, tortured so many within her kingdom as a means of trying to defend it against Christianity and defend it against Western imperial overtures. How do they understand Ranavalona's legacy today? And the fact that, Madagascar was colonized by the French in the end anyway, despite Ranavalona's efforts. So I felt that so many of the conversations that I was having were very revealing and very generative as well, because I am coming into this space as an African of the diaspora. So I do think that there is, when I was having conversations with people, there was almost like, especially if people were queer as well, a kind of community or link, a connection that was kind of fostered and allowed people to kind of try and unravel some of their difficulties around these figures beyond the official narratives, beyond government narratives. Some people having skepticism around some of the figures that I've included in the book that are upheld as, nationalistic kind of symbols for liberation, for uprising, but actually privately having some questions, people trying to work out their feelings around rulers that they herald who were fundamental to the shuttling of abducted Africans across the continent and through to the Americas. And I think that those kind of conversations really, they were so eye-opening and I think very revealing about the figures in questions and the figures in question and how they're perceived today. So I felt like it was quite crucial, but also I'm a journalist as well. And I am not interested in like the myth of objectivity. I think I try to make an argument across the book that Western historical practice is often just as speculative, is often just as subjective, but is presented as a neutral base for where all other history work should originate from, when you have instances littered across the book of colonial historians conferring with one another, trying to make juicier details because they know that this is what will appeal to their readership back in the UK. You have the fact that some of them would never talk about the defeats of their colonial forces and really emphasize their victories. There's so much that has been augmented in terms of Western history production. And I wanted to actually lean into the understanding that the archive is also a site of violence. And when you have abducted Africans who are described as, listed as cargo, but not as valuable as gold or mahogany, but this is the only way that we understand their existence, their presence, that they lived, then that is also a violence. And I guess searching for counter histories that grapple with the colonial agendas that underpin so much of what we know of the African continent, that was crucial to me. And I really leaned into, I tried to lean into my subjectivity, and also account for the fact that I am an outsider, that the real experts are the people that I spoke to. Those are the conversations that hold all of the gems. And I didn't want to bastardize their words. I wanted to kind of present our conversations and exchanges as they were. So that's a really long answer to quite a simple question.
No, and I think all the nuance is really good for people to understand who haven't read your book yet, just to know that like you're there in the book and you're throughout, like you're interrogating these questions, like you said, about, well, and I appreciate this as well in your book, that the figures are all given the respect of looking at the nuance of their life, like not just a hero, not just a villain, but all the different sides, to present them as like a full-fledged person. But you mentioned the way that some of these records were colonial based with their biases and their understanding. And that gets us into all the queer stuff in your book, which I love to talk about, especially because it's Pride Month. So can we start with Njinga and
Absolutely.
pronouns and gender?
Absolutely. So Njinga is such a fascinating figure who is widely presented as a queen, as a woman, which again really bolsters nationalistic symbolism. And especially when in 1960, that was the year of Africa, and you had all of these present day countries emerging and becoming independent. They wanted to bolster this kind of Pan-Africanist further with, these historical figures who have risen up against these colonial forces before, which means that we can do it again. And so Njinga was quite perfect for that, defying 13 Portuguese governors who were trying to squeeze the kingdoms of Ndongo and Matamba, which are found in present-day Angola, across their reign. This is the problem. So even then, right, this is the thing around the pronouns, because the English language, it imbues so much meaning into words that didn't exist in a lot of the languages of these African societies. So in Njinga's language of Kimbundu, it didn't have any gendered pronouns. And therefore, to describe them as she, her, it, I think ushers in a perceived notion of what that person should look like, how they should engage, what that behavior looks like. Meanwhile, Njinga often wanted to be referred to by a male coded name, wore masculine clothing, sought to be understood on parity with their Portuguese counterparts, which was really confusing to the people, well, to the occupiers, to the Portuguese occupiers, because they had an understanding of a queen, of a donna. And it wasn't just Njinga as well. within their court, they had people who we would describe today as assigned male at birth, but lived their lives out as women, were understood as grandmother. They were called kimbandas, and they were believed to have a very special powers. There was an honor for any man to be married to kimbanda. And I think particularly exploring Njinga and also the Ogogie, who are the all-women fighting regiment of the ancient kingdom of Dahomey, and were a lot of historians, they almost have question marks about whether they could have ever been sexually active with each other, even though there is evidence that they were. And colonial historians have described it in retrospect as these Dahomeans trying to follow through their concept of duality, which runs throughout their belief systems of one thing must always be matched by another. That if people outside of the palace were having sex with women sex workers and other women, then of course, I guess the Ogogie maybe did the same thing, but it was carried out through to its logical extreme. So here you see a lot of historians imbuing their work with their own biases, with their own conditions of heteronormativity, and unable to actually explore the expansiveness that we know is inherent in queerness, that we know is inherent within sexual expression, gender expression, and Njinga's gender plurality is understood perhaps as a costume, perhaps as a way to accrue more respect by putting on a facade of a man. Whereas the Gogie, this is just carried through to its logical extreme. There's no other reason why these soldiers would want to have sex with other women or with each other. And I think the virtue of being a Black lesbian woman means that I enter these spaces as a historian, these as living testament, these are not beyond the realm of possibility, whereas they are, there's so much question and doubt, and really underpinned by this understanding that homosexuality, queerness, transness is new, is recent, and didn't originate or exist in African societies, especially predating contact with colonial forces. And I felt like it was so critical to include not only these figures and these histories that predate the terms queer and trans, but we would understand them as such today, but also little other examples about the Sangomas of Zulu societies found in South Africa who marry people of any gender, the Lesotho women who are found in present-day Lesotho, who have always had long-standing relationships between women, and that is just the state of play. That is their cultural, that forms part of their cultural beliefs. I really wanted to include it because I think a lot of Black Africans and queer Africans will no doubt have encountered the understanding that queerness, homosexuality, lesbianism, Sapphistree, all of it is some sort of Western import, is some sort of white import into our previously very religious Christian societies, and which allows so much myth, but like an externalism of queerness, which has always existed within African societies. So it was really crucial for me to include it, but also I hope that, maybe people will be drawn to the book by this idea of queens and, these elite figures, because they want an exploration of African histories that don't hinge on enslavement and trauma and unimaginable suffering, and so kind of turn towards pictures of wealth. But So they're drawn to the book, hopefully. And then I've just slipped in some queer theory in there. And I just slipped in, a reckoning with Christianity, a reckoning with transness, and hopefully just pulling people into wider areas of discourse that they didn't expect when initially picking up the book. So yeah.
It reminds me of just what a lot of recent scholars are doing now, talking about indigenous cultures in North America, for instance, and talking about like the damage that colonialism did everywhere is expansive and multifaceted. And part of that was kind of coming to a place and seeing something that that wasn't their experience. It's like, oh, this person is wearing a dress, and to me that looks like a man, and that must mean that these are backwards people, that this must mean this has to be fixed or changed, instead of understanding what the culture was. And so a lot of like the work like you're doing in here is kind of explaining, well, here's what it was like before. Here's what they might have seen and it was misinterpreted, and here's what it actually was. And that leads to so many, I'm really happy to be talking to you about this in Pride Month, because all the discussion about like, oh, there's all these trans people and there didn't used to be. It's like, no, there always was. And then colonialism stamped it out. And now it's coming back to how it maybe was. Like, it's not a new invention. And I think it's so great that you have these concrete, specific examples of cultures where this was happening, where same-sex relationships were happening. And it's not new. It's actually very old. And yeah, so I was just so happy that was part of your book. And now for a quick advertising break.
You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Progressive loves to help people make smart choices. That's why they offer a tool called Auto Quote Explorer that allows you to compare your Progressive car insurance quote with rates from other companies. So you save time on the research and can enjoy savings when you choose the best rate for you. Give it a try after this episode at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy. If you've ever shopped online, and let's face it, who hasn't? Chances are you've bought something from a business powered by Shopify. You know that purple Shop Pay button you see at checkout? The one that makes buying so incredibly easy? That's Shopify. And there's a reason so many businesses sell with it, because Shopify makes things easier, and not just for shoppers. They make it easy to start and run your business. Shopify is the commerce platform behind 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started. It gives you a leg up from day dot, with hundreds of beautiful ready-to-go templates to express your brand style so you can get up and running fast. You can tackle your important tasks, from inventory to payments to analytics and more, all in one place. You can also spread your brand's word with built-in marketing and email tools built for you to find and keep new customers. And remember that iconic purple Shop Pay button that's used by millions of businesses around the world? It's why Shopify has the best converting checkout on the planet. Your customers already know and love it. If you want to see less carts being abandoned, it's time for you to head over to Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/realm. Go to shopify.com/realm. Shopify.com/realm. I love a multi-use beauty product, like an eye/cheek/lipstick. It makes a full face so much easier, plus you only need to bring one product along for touch-ups. And whether you're all about simple mascara and gloss, or you love to play with bold shapes and colors, you gotta have that trusty favorite you turn to for every look. Thrive Cosmetics makes certified 100% vegan and cruelty-free products you can depend on for everything from simple daily wear to show-stopping self-expression. And it's all made with clean, skin-loving ingredients, high-performance and trademarked formulas, and uncompromising standards. And Thrive Cosmetics is beauty that gives back. For every product purchased, they make a donation towards 8 major causes, including social justice organizations and those impacted by cancer and homelessness. It feels good knowing that when I purchase a product, I'm also able to give back to causes that matter to me. And one product I love from Thrive Cosmetics is the Brilliant Eye Brightener. Like I said, I love a product that can have multiple uses, and the Brilliant Eye Brightener is just that. It's an eyeshadow and highlighter stick that's super blendable, and I'm slowly but surely stocking up on the 31 shades that it comes in. Try your new trusty favorites with an exclusive set for our listeners. New customers can get the Liquid Lash Extensions Mascara and a mini-sized Brilliant Eye Brightener at a special set price with free shipping available at thrivecosmetics.com/thrive. Or save more with 20% off your first order at thrivecosmetics.com/thrive. That's Thrive Cosmetics, CAUSEMETICS.com/thrive for 20% off your first order.
This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. Psst, healthcare pros, word's out, and it's too good to keep quiet. Look, LinkedIn is revolutionizing job hunting, making it possible to search by specialty, shift preference, and salary. Endless scrolling is out. Whether it's a mental health therapist or dental hygienist, finding the perfect role is faster and easier than ever. Head to linkedin.com/healthcare and start your search today.
And we're back.
Yeah, I'm so glad as well. And I guess I think this is such an interesting part of like publishing as an industry, right? As well, because I think that they want sometimes a very specific and like categorized idea of what you're working on, what kind of work you're producing. And okay, this is an African history book, but I really hope that it kind of pushes a bit at the genre in terms of actually this is feminism, this is politics, this is queer theory, this is so much that I guess when we're talking about Pride Month as well, I would be really intrigued if my book gets included in conversations around queerness, around Pride, because I think that there are still narratives that we're troubling that African history means that it stands in silo away from queer history, away from trans histories. And like you said, that they are, not only are they intertwined, they have predated the terms, they have existed long before, missionaries started bringing over their families and their nuclear family setups to try and demonstrate to indigenous populations that this is actually how you should be living your life. You seem to have no established mother or father within the family. Okay, that can't work. A whole community cannot mother or parent a child. It actually has to look very individualized. This is, you have your own homestead, you have your own. Yeah, so then kind of really instituting these heteronormative values while at the same time ridding indigenous populations of their places of worship and commemoration, their shrines. So I would say that the bringing in of nuclear families to kind of diminish not only queerness, but also kinship ties. This was part of a huge Western strategy to supplant, to replace, to demonize and point people towards actually this is how you should be living, while completely misunderstanding and recklessly and carelessly just displacing everything that had come before. So this is also when we're talking about, for example, queens, in English, we queen can actually stand in for so much. What kind of queen are we talking about? Are we talking about someone who is a queen consort, queen mother? It gets used to describe so much, whereas we're trying to fix that language to African elite figures where queen might be better replaced with high priestess. Queen might be better replaced with, some sort of divine figure. So alongside distorting all of their familial, social, relational practices, also distorting their understandings of rule, sovereignty, and the ways that their societies were functioning. And honestly, it's a bit depressing. Because I I sometimes think about my conclusion and I'm just like, maybe I should have things on a lighter note. But I guess I was being really real in how devastating it is to see the wealth of cultural systems, beliefs, ways of living that were disbanded, stamped out, demonized, and like historians like myself, historians in those present day countries are doing what they can to preserve, snatch at all of the little glimpses that they see, because it wasn't deemed to be in line with European, Western ideas of civilization, and as white superior societies, it was their job, their duty to impose their beliefs on the barbaric African societies that they sought out. Yeah, it's difficult, and I think especially when you're maybe dealing with histories that are so close to your identities in some ways as well. But I at least hope with pulling together a couple of these African histories that it just gives people a starting point, a way of challenging Western history production, just saying, okay, actually, if you can bend and augment what this history looked like here, then where else have you done that? And to kind of search outwardly from that point.
Well, and also just in terms of the way that the records, the colonial writing about these people was partially, propaganda to explain it's like, and this is why it was important that the British or the Dutch or the Portuguese came in and changed everything, because look at how horrifying it was before. I'm using air quotes, listeners. But I mean, that really comes out of the story of like Ranavalona, for instance, who is still, like you're talking about the people you're talking to there, like she was so demonized at the time that even people in that country still are just like, oh, she was a bad queen, I think somebody called her, who you talked to. Can you talk about her, like that complicated legacy and how that came to be?
Absolutely. So Ranavalona is a 19th century ruler, ruled over Imarina, found in present-day Madagascar. And she followed through with what her husband started. Her husband, Radama, wanted the island to become an island state that rivaled the British, that rivaled the French, and to follow codes of self-sufficiency, to have minimal contact with other nations, and to truly rule themselves. And part of the threat to that was Christianity. You had these Christian missionaries that were beginning to convert Marina peoples. And Ranavalona took that as a not even kind of like a political issue, but also an issue of like rule and sovereignty, because with the Merina people, it was understanding their ruler as a divine figure who also channels the will of the ancestors. So to follow Jesus, for example, is to not only take on a new set of beliefs, but to completely spurn your ancestral beliefs as well. And so Ranavalona took to torturing, to killing, hunting down converts and missionaries within the across the island. And when the British, because you had like these British colonial kind of dwellers, representatives who were attempting to make a life on the island, when Ranavalona was turning her wrath towards them, expecting them to either carry out the work that would normally be reserved for enslaved people, or to simply vacate the island if they weren't willing to do that, then the British, the French, this was such an affront to their power. They wanted to the same way that the British had hold of the island of Mauritius, they wanted to repeat the same thing for themselves as well, because it would aid their trading routes. And here was this brown woman, this vigorously kind of determined woman who wanted nothing to do with them, who was actually spurning the overtures of, these Christian powers who were only trying to expand their wealth, their knowledge to these uncivilized savages, right? So they began to, in their home countries, particularly in British, a lot of propaganda, a lot of very anti-Ranavalona, anti kind of the Malagasy kind of peoples. But at the same time, they had Princess Victoria, who was coming through. So their criticism couldn't rest on the fact that Ranavalona was a woman, but rather that she was unsaved, uncivilized. She was a Malay Jezebel. She was brown with smallpox marks all over her face, compared to the pristine white womanhood of this fair queen, this white queen coming through. So this very much has shaped the legacy of Ranavalona and how she earned, titles like the Bloody Mary of Madagascar. There was a binary that had to be constructed between Ranavalona and Victoria. And this also is coupled with the very incredibly brutal, violent acts. Like, she halved essentially her population, like, across her reign. And there was so much violence wrapped up in what she did and what a number of the figures in the book did. And Njinga was critical to the funneling of enslaved Africans through their kingdoms. And unfortunately for us, our understanding of their cruelty is so hampered, is so garbled by the determined agendas of the Western and colonial chroniclers who were divvying up their lives, who were at the same time trying to make their rules and reigns really lurid, to really jump off the page and grab the British public, the British reading public, who were encountering these tales of tropical islands where there are lemurs and monkeys running free that are, dominated by these savage people. Like, there was also a duty on the part of these writers to conjure up really fantastical imagery that suited the readership, that bolstered their understanding of their own white superiority and why they believed that they were in a position to redeem, to save, to deliver societies like the Merina peoples. And of course, there is no shortage of understanding the depravity of a lot of Ranavalona's actions, but it's also that her rule is often presented as a silo. She was just a mad queen, rather than examining the context, the conditions, what she was reacting to, the fact that she was continuing her husband's legacy. A lot of the things that he had put in place were blamed on Ranavalona. And so it was framed as this mad woman who had come in and disrupted what her, honorable husband had been starting. He had understood that he needed the British and the French. This wasn't true. He was for isolationism. But again, so there is misogyny, there is racist, and the word has literally floated out of my head, but I use it all the time. Anyway, eugenics, yes. Oh, thank God. The myths of white superiority, that they all underpin how Ranavalona has been historicized and is understood on the Madagascar island today, and how we read her as well. So I wanted to kind of trouble our understanding of these figures who, are presented as villains, or as simply heroes. And actually, that it does none of us it's a disservice to all of us, to look at people with such a reductive and lacking nuance kind of way. And that was a terrible way of wording that. But yeah, I guess that's kind of the legacy of Ranavalona, which is really complicated. It means that, like you said, some people understand her as a really bad queen. Other people that I spoke to understood her as some sort of feminist figure who was taking a stand against anti-imperialism. And it's so loaded, it's so complicated. And when I think about Madagascar, I really wish that I could find out, just how Ranavalona I would understand the history of Madagascar since she died, the way that her son unraveled basically all of her life's work, the way that Madagascar was colonized by the French anyway, the legacies that you see across the island today. Like, I noticed how many, I was at my hotel and I ended up asking someone about this, but just you'd see a lot of young Malagasy women with white older men. And I was seeing this every night, constantly. And this is also part of the legacies, because there is such a good standard of living for Westerners in Madagascar, particularly if you are a French person, you speak French. There has been an encouragement over like the last decade or two for older white Frenchmen to, build a life in Madagascar where you have a cheap standard of living, you have, Malagasy women who there are a lot of sex workers, but then there's also this assumption that every Malagasy woman is just up for it because you swan in with all of this money. This is a colonial legacy, and it's permeates the island today. So it's there is so much that's loaded in Ranavalona's story, but also why I wanted to also focus on the contemporary, because you cannot separate the Madagascar island today from its past as an Imerina kingdom heralded, led by Ranavalona.
And I think too, I come across this just in my work as well, and just a lot of time when you see a woman leader, a genderqueer leader anywhere in history who was in any way brutal, who was in any way a military success. And then it's sort of like, oh, wow, this person, like, this is, look at all these things. Ranavalona is such a good example of this. Or Njinga, if you look at them, it's like, but what were they up against? What were their enemies doing? It's like, you need to put it, and your book does this really well, I think, of putting it in the context of like, yeah, like these were the brutal acts that they seem to have perpetuated. And these were the brutal acts that the British were doing, that the Portuguese were doing, that the Dutch were doing. It's not just like everything was chill and suddenly this mad woman came in and started killing everybody. It's like, it was a reaction to what was happening. And we celebrate that in some, like, I don't know, Boudica in England,
Yes.
Fighting against the Romans. It's like, hell yeah, look at this woman. It's not just like, oh, she killed all these people. It's like, that was great because that was a white woman. And because it's sort of like a history of like I forget if she was Anglo-Saxon, but like, of like kicking the Romans out of England. That's like a success story. So like in that context, we can celebrate her. But in these contexts, it's like, if you remove the context, Ranavalona seems like a madwoman, but it's like, no, this is what she was fighting. And she knew this is what happened to other places. And this is why she was so determined about it.
Absolutely. And also these systems already demonized her, criminalized her for rejecting European imperialism, for, being a brown person who decided that she didn't want to engage these European powers who were intent on her kingdom and the resources of her land. So we're not even able, I think, I tried, but it's very difficult to appraise her cruelty without having to. Okay, let me say that again. It's very difficult to appraise her cruelty because it's been so obfuscated by the fact that she was a brown woman that needed to be taken down, that she was an African that needed to be taken down because of the nerve in the first place for rejecting Christianity, for rejecting European ideals. So when you're already starting from that base level, that completely changes, like you said, like the playing field. It's not like they were on equal footing and then suddenly, Ranavalona started chopping people in half. Like, that's not how it played out. But of course, so much of that has been removed from the official narratives that have emerged out of, British history production. And I guess this is why it's so critical for increasingly more historians, more scholars to be working from a completely, in my opinion, a critical understanding of the colonial archive and its legacies and how we go about disassembling those myths while trying to locate these figures, locate the acts that they did, whether those were, good and contributed to the success of their lands and the success of their peoples, or whether they were brutal and harmful. But it requires us to do the very best we can not to repeat colonial myth.
Well, thank you so much for talking to me today. And thank you so much for writing this book. I was so excited, like just on a personal note. So I do this podcast where I talk about women from history. And a few years ago, I was making the conscious effort to try to talk about not just people from England, France, Spain, because there's so many books about those people already. So for me as an English speaker, it's like, well, that's what I'm able to research. I'm like, no, I want to learn about other people. I want to learn about the queens of Africa. And it's just like, Njinga was kind of it. It's like, that's the only person I could find enough information about that I could do a podcast about it. So I was like, this book exists. This is amazing. You're introducing me to so many people I hadn't heard of. So just like personally, I'm just like, oh, I'm excited to have new people to know about and to maybe get to explore more deeply. So I appreciate that very much as a podcaster.
You are welcome. Thank you for reading.
And you are doing so many events. This episode is airing towards the beginning of June. If people want to keep up with all the many appearances that you're going to be doing, you have a website that lists where you're going to be and when, right?
Yes, I do. Just paulaakpan.com. I'm honestly just Paula Akpan on everything apart from Twitter, formerly known as X, because I got rid of that, didn't I? But yeah, I normally update my Instagram the most, and of course my website.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for talking with me today about this book, and I hope that you continue to have great success talking to people about it as people are able to read it. Actually, I have one more question, which is what has the response been like to people who have read it, like now that you're out in the world talking about it with people?
It has honestly been like really humbling in a lot of ways, especially when I'm talking to older Africans who just talk about how they've been looking for like 20 years for something around this topic, and specifically with a focus on African women rulers. But I'm obviously throwing in genderqueer rulers because you will learn at any age. And just like how powerful it is to see it in the kind of mainstream kind of space, to be able to go into a Waterstones and see a book about 12 African women and genderqueer rulers just staring out at you. So that's been incredible. And I think what's touched me most is just people who are from the communities and peoples, like the ethnic groups that are mentioned within the book. And I guess just feeling like they have a greater connection with their community as a result, or with their identity as a result. So that has been incredible. But of course, there have also been, because of my stance on challenging Western history production and the archive and searching counter histories, then people who may be very beholden to institutions and academic institutions, questioning, objectivity and, well, how can you critique like Western scholars in this way and blah, 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 which I always expected. But I think because I always knew who I was writing this for or had in mind. I was thinking of Africans on the continent and within the diaspora. And that has been my sole kind of focus. And that is the only way that I know how to engage these different modes of storytelling that pop up across the book, whether it's, dance or praise poems or whatever it is. I feel, I hope that I have done them proud. And yeah, from the response, there's been excitement. So that's nice. And yeah, more of that,
No,
I hope.
that's wonderful. Thank you so much. That's what I hope for you as well. More of that.
More of that. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. So as Paula said, you can keep up with her and what she's up to on Instagram, where she's at Paula Akpan, or her website is paulaakpan.com. She's got a bunch of appearances coming up across the UK. And yeah, she's such a fun person. I was so excited to talk to her. I read this book and I was just like, every page, just so much looking forward to talking to her about everything. When I read books for interviews, I go through and I take pictures of the pages with like specific things that interest me or that I want to remember so I can bring up in the interview. And I had so many pictures taken of various things she talks about in this book. So again, the book is available in the UK and Commonwealth territories, as well as in Canada and the US, and it is called When We Ruled, The Rise and Fall of 12 African Queens and Warriors. It's a book that I'm going to keep on hand just for myself for future episode idea purposes, but I do think it's a good book to own because there's so much good information in it. You need to kind of like read a chapter, like set it down, think about it for a while, and then go back to the next chapter because each one is such a interesting story. I don't know if you can hear the purring. That's my cat Hepburn. She's also really psyched. She liked talking to Paula. Paula has, I think, 3 cats, she said. So that recommends a person to me. Absolutely. Anyway, speaking of books that are available to order, I have a book that is coming out next year. It's called Rebel of the Regency, The Scandalous Saga of Caroline of Brunswick, Britain's Uncrowned Queen. And it's available now for pre-order. So if you go to rebeloftheregency.com, that's rebeloftheregency.com, you will find information about places where you can pre-order it, although you can just like walk to your local neighborhood bookstore or go to their website and order it from them as well. And if you do pre-order my book, you get some special treats, or you can opt in to get some special treats. So when you pre-order my book, Rebel of the Regency, go to rebeloftheregency.com and you can fill out a little form there where you upload a picture of your receipt. And then you can say what are the special treats you want. And the things that I have on offer are you can get 1 year free paid membership to my Substack newsletter. You can get 1 year free paid membership to my Patreon. I had thought before that wasn't available to current free members, but in fact, it's available to anybody who's not already a paid member of my Patreon. So that's exciting news. And then the other third thing you can get is a Caroline of Brunswick digital image that is a Caroline of Brunswick paper doll. And when you get the paper doll, you're going to be like, first of all, it's adorable. The paper doll is designed by Siobhan Gallagher, who has done some merch for me before, and it's so cute. Caroline looks so cute. She has outfits you can put on her, accessories, and hats. And one of the hats is a hollowed out pumpkin. And you might think, why is one of the hats on this paper doll a hollowed out pumpkin? And you'll find out when you read my book, Rebel of the Regency. Learn more at rebeloftheregency.com. Anyway, there's also a link in the show notes that when you're buying Paula's book or my book, if you want to, you could also use my special link to bookshop.org, which is an online service where you can order books from. And when you use my link, then a little bit of money from the book goes towards me. So, and you're not supporting evil billionaire-owned businesses by using that store if you're not sure who to order things from. That link is in the show notes as well. And I think that's everything. So next week, well, actually, in 2 days, there's going to be another special bonus episode because it's Pride Month in North America. And there's so many people that I wanted to talk to and share their books and stories with you. So that's why we're doubling up a few weeks. And this Friday is one of those times. So we're going to be talking about trans history with some very special guests. So stay tuned for that on Friday. And then otherwise, new episodes every week. That's what's happening. And happy Pride. Keep your pants on and your tits out, and I'll talk to you all next time. Vulgar History is researched, scripted, and hosted by Ann Foster. That's me. Editor is Christina Lumagi. Theme music is by the Severn Duo. Transcripts of this podcast are available at vulgarhistory.com by Aveline Malik. You can get early, ad-free episodes of Vulgar History by becoming a paid member of our Patreon for as low as $1 a month at patreon.com/AnnFosterWriter. Vulgar History merchandise is available at vulgarhistory.com/store for Americans, and for everyone else at vulgarhistory.redbubble.com. Follow us on social media at Vulgar History Pod, and get in touch with me via email at vulgarhistorypod@gmail.com.
The Old West is an iconic period of American history and full of legendary figures whose names still resonate today, like Jesse James, Billy the Kid, and Butch and Sundance, Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, and Geronimo, Wyatt Earp, Bat Masterson, and Bass Reeves, Buffalo Bill Cody, Wild Bill Hickok, the Texas Rangers, and many more. Hear all their stories on the Legends of the Old West podcast. We'll take you to Tombstone, Deadwood, and Dodge City, to the plains, mountains, and deserts for battles between the U.S. Army and Native American warriors, to dark corners for the disaster of the Donner Party, and shining summits for achievements like the Transcontinental Railroad. We'll go back to the earliest days of explorers and mountain men, and head up through notorious Pinkerton agents and gunmen like Tom Horn. Every episode features narrative writing and cinematic music, and there are hundreds of episodes available to binge. I'm Chris Wimmer. Find Legends of the Old West wherever you're listening now.
You might think you know fairy tales, and you might think that they are cute and sweet and boring. But the real Grimm fairy tales were not cute at all. They were very dark, and they were often very grim. On Grim, Grimmer, Grimmest, we tell a grim fairy tale to a bunch of kids. Perfect for car rides or screen-free entertainment, Grim, Grimmer, Grimmest activates kids' imaginations and instigates fun conversation. Because fairy tales speak to all of us at a very deep, primal level, and they raise interesting topics and questions that are worth chewing over together as a family. Every episode is rated Grim, Grimmer, or Grimmest, so you, your kids, your whole family can choose what is the right level of grim for you. Though, if you're listening with Grandma, she's just gonna go for Grimmest. Trust me on this one. Tune in to Grim, Grimmer, Grimmest, and our new season, available now.
Can you actually change your personality if you want to? How does peer pressure work, and why is it so powerful? Should you ever really trust your gut when you make a big decision? These are just a few of the topics we've recently covered on my podcast, Something You Should Know. I'm the host, Mike Carruthers, and each episode of Something You Should Know covers multiple topics that are likely relevant to you. You'll discover things you can use in your life today, right now, like how to have a great conversation, how to be more courageous, the anatomy of the perfect apology, and much, much more. To date, there are over 1,000 episodes of Something You Should Know, and we've gotten over 4,000 mostly 5-star reviews. I invite you to check out Something You Should Know. Look for the bright yellow light bulb on the blue background. Something You Should Know, wherever you listen to podcasts.